The odd thing about this whole thing, I have not seen Canada so united in a long time. It's almost like unite against the common enemy. And you know who the enemy ended up being? Ourselves. Because we let all of this shit happen over the last decade and we didn't take it seriously. It's time for
Nope.
Canada to be a serious country.
All right, John, welcome back to the tank. I'm sorry we took last week off. I got rocked in the face with a Norwalk flu bug or something that's been taking everybody down, but I don't think I really missed much. Anything happening over the last week or so?
I don't know. Let me go look on X, and I'll just see if there's any
Check and
any
see, because
tweets
I
out
didn't
there.
see if there was there. Oh, right, there was that trade war thing that was happening like north of the wall and online. But you know what? I'm just joking. Let's jump into it, John, because there's a lot that I missed when I was out sick last week. So, for those who are living under a rock, we had the back and forth between Trump and Trudeau and the president of Mexico going all out on a full-blown trade war, as it was being described online and between the mainstream media. But it all came pretty quickly to a halt after what people are saying Trudeau won and Mexico won and Trump folded. How are you seeing this as it played out in real time between February 1st, when Trump introduced the orders of imposing the 25% tariffs on all exports from Canada except for oil, which I want to speak about as well, and then how quickly things changed on February 3rd?
I mean, starting on who won, well, we all lost. Everyone's losing, and it's going to continue on. And Matt, this is the theme that you and I have been talking almost from the very beginning. We are witnessing live the deglobalization of the world, and it really was something that was started back in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union, but it's taking its time to filter through. And the U.S. is doing exactly what we had expected, although I gotta say some of these tactics are like way out in left field. But the point is the same. The U.S. is reverting to, I used the term before, isolationism. I didn't really realize how isolationist they wanted to be. I was thinking more around the Monroe Doctrine. The part that really surprised me is the U.S. values, or at least they say they value national security and its allies. And to hit Canada and Mexico like that, in priority to China at higher rates, I just thought it was appalling. But I actually think it was a strategic flaw. Why do I say that? I could argue that the imposition of tariffs at a nominal rate might make sense in order to lever and kind of pay the toll charge of accessing the U.S. consumer economy in particular. And, we can have an economic debate on that. But if it was a 5 or 10% tariff, the response by Canada, it makes it a lot tougher. But they actually made it really easy. When you hit 25, you got to smack it hard right back. And this threat of doubling up, I mean, who really cares? Once you're at 25, I don't care. Do 50, do 100. It doesn't matter because the damage is already done. So what I really hope through this is, and I think Toby Lutke had said it right, although, some people had misinterpreted his words. Canada has some great value to the United States strategically in order for the U.S. to achieve its objectives. So value that arrangement. And there are things that Canada has done that you and I have spoken about quite vigorously over the last number of years, where we have our own goals ourselves. So while Canada did not trigger the insanity of this trade war, we put ourselves in the absolute most vulnerable position with no wiggle room, that if those tariffs did come out, you would see spending, debt, and a decrease in our economy like we've never seen. So, we are
Mm,
nowhere out of the woods right now. And at least I like the direction of, hey, take the goddamn borders seriously and forget
right.
about the Americans for the moment, but take it seriously for our own Canadians who have been whining about this for a long time. And what is the most disturbing thing out of all of this? It took some insane comments from a foreign leader to actually get our government to act on issues that we have been freaking out over for years. That is the most tasteless part of this whole thing. We will survive. We will do great. Canada is resilient and all those sorts of things. But let's stop doing the stupid stuff to put ourselves in these horrible positions.
But I think what we're seeing in these negotiations with Trump is that he pushes the envelope to the absolute extreme to awaken the actual people who have things that they wanna fight for, speak out clearly about what they're actually fighting for, so you can see who they're being paid off basically by. You wanna see where people's motivations are when things are taken away from them, and I think Trump does a really good job of bringing out those sort of behind the curtain motivations around a lot of different politicians and things like that and industry representatives. I mean, let's face it, John, we've had tariffs for a long time on dairy products. We've got tariffs of over 270% on milk,
Mhm.
245% on cheese, and almost 300% on butter. We've got poultry tariffs. We've got
Crazy.
fish and tobacco and steel and car tariffs. Those are some of the most significant tariffs from Canada to the US we have over a long time, not including even softwood lumber. So tariffs have always been around, but I think what Trump was trying to bring
Right.
out of the population, as well as this inept political party, is enough is enough. We're putting this in place. So you start taking this seriously because we've already said it once and we're not going to say it another time. And I think that's why this conversation escalated
Yeah.
so quickly. And then finally, when Trudeau came to up and said, fine, we'll do what we said we were going to do, give us 30 days to figure it out. We'll put a bunch of Canada geese on the border. This will probably give us some time. I still think we're not out of the woods, though. Do you?
Oh, no. We have a government that's not at work. We're doing a sideshow while we have the most significant risk to the Canadian economy that I've seen in my entire career. And we're mucking around with a leadership. Like, really? What the hell do we need March 9th for? You've already coronated who the person is. Yeah, I know you're trying to avoid the same trap that Kamala Harris, where they did a coronation, but at least the Americans just say, let's just deal with it. In Canada, we're playing games on here. Get people
Right.
back to work because there is a lot of fixing to be done. And, you know, the odd thing about this whole thing, I have not seen Canada so united in a long time. It's almost like unite against the common enemy. And you know who the enemy ended up being? Ourselves, because we let all of this shit happen over the last decade and we didn't take it seriously. It's time for
Nope.
Canada to be a serious country. The US is a great ally for us, you know, but at the same time, they're an ally, and allies are not friends. Allies have purpose. And I've said this before, we don't matter to the United States other than three things. I've said this many, many times. It's oil, it's minerals and resources, and it's coordinated defense. You could pretend you think it's more than that, but it's not. And so get our hands around that, fix it now. But damn, like, get back to work in parliament as fast as possible so that you get all the brains at the table and operate this government the way it should be.
You mean it's not just a good old hockey rivalry every 4 years in the Winter Olympics? Got it. Okay, thanks, John. You know what is interesting, though? There
Yeah.
was an interesting article written about a group that is trying to change Canada and push it forward into the future that the
Yep.
Logic had a scoop on.
Yep.
But I don't know, well, if that scoop went as intended as they thought, because now that group is officially launched called Build Canada to push for
Yep.
bold policy reforms. It's a new initiative that has been launched with a new website, releasing its first set of policies tackling critical issues on immigration, healthcare, transportation, and national pride. This is a group that is led by a collective of Canadian tech workers, including Ben Perry, Daniel Dubois, Lucy Hargreaves, and Melody Koo. Obviously, you have your hands all over this, John, as you have been talking about having a group like this put together to push Canada into the future. And you've got about 28 Canadian tech entrepreneurs supporting it as listed on the website. And we will have Dan on the podcast soon to talk about this. But
Yeah, there's
what are
far
your
more
thoughts
than that.
around
Yeah,
this?
yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a
There's far
lot
more
more
that
behind that.
you'll see
Exactly.
all the other names come up there.
What's
There's a
the
lot more
motivation
than
behind
that.
this now? And what do you think we're going to start to
Yeah,
see from this among the policies already listed?
yeah. I mean, this was the brainchild of Toby at Shopify. In that, what was happening was, and as you know, we have our CCI lobby group, and doing the policy formulation and all that sort of stuff. But that's kind of the long game stuff, and that's doing amazing things. And then what was boiling up was a bunch of folks in the technology industry that were sort of sitting at the sidelines saying, I'm really frustrated. Like, I want to help, but I don't know how to help. No one is reaching out to ask me for help, but what can I do for help? And what it was, first it was just simply a WhatsApp group of all of this incredible minds together saying, well, what if we did this? And it wasn't just around innovation, and people think it's self-serving. There's a little bit of that in there, but it's about great minds with just great ideas. And there was this constant of, well, what about this? What about that? And people going, yeah, and you tinker this. Wouldn't it be great if Canada did this? And so what was the real key point was when Dan Dubois raised his hand and said, look, you know what? This is so important. Let me devote my time to this, certainly until, an election rolls around. And let's get these ideas out. And you just saw the explosion of the ideas that have been developing over the last 6 weeks or so. And there is a whole slew more coming. And this is to get, the Overton window open and getting people to think about stuff. It's not perfect, etc., but get the ideas out and get that formulation, because really Canada has been quiet for too long, and it's time to get loud. And the last thing I will say, these are a bunch of people who love Canada, and just because they're criticizing what's going on right now, as opposed to criticizing that back, accept the idea generation. And this is what makes our country so fantastic.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. Everyone should go and check out the website if they haven't already, buildcanada.com, and look at some of the memos that have been written that are very clear and concise by some of the smartest tech leaders in this
Fantastic stuff.
country that we have who are dedicating to this. There's stuff that is written, very clearly, like, immigration reform, Great People, Greater Canada by Martin Abbas. So you've got, Michael Syria talking about unlocking healthcare records, saving Canadian lives. You've got transportation and infrastructure ideas by Stuart Lyons. You've got Michael Litt talking about pride and innovation. There are very clear policies here that obviously need to be worked through the political channels, but they're out there in the open for
Yeah,
everyone to consume. And I really love the idea of how, yes, there was a lot of ideas being tossed around in the group, but nothing was really put into structure that was consumable and also actionable. And this is the reason why Dan has taken such
correct.
a leap into building this, and I'm very excited. And hopefully, we get a lot more people submitting ideas, and we'll see what happens up coming into the next
Yep.
election cycle. Anything on your side, John? You're hearing about changes on the Liberal Party here. Carney seems to be the one taking the lead without saying much.
I guess there is a clear, at least internally in the Liberal Party, virtually every minister is supporting Carney. I don't know how that translates into the people who are voting on the leadership, but he seems to be the institutional favorite. How's that by a wide margin? Now, the old adage, though, and this is the part that I find a little odd. if there's no election being called, you don't really release your full platform because there's no mandate to really speak about it. But there is a leadership convention going on where traditionally, how do you pick leaders if you don't know what their platform is? So Chrystia Freeland is been, I'd say, most active in trying to get more specific in some of the things where you're getting almost nothing from Carney. But here is the funniest part about this. All of the candidates, or at least the ones that have been, are currently in government, have mentioned policies that only a month ago or so they completely were against. And so the policies that they are espousing are the same policies that the conservative platform has been espousing, carbon tax, the retail carbon tax, the capital gains. I find it rather amusing that you were fighting so hard against it, and yet in only 4 weeks you found the error of your ways, and all of a sudden, like, you're supposed to believe that that's sincere. I find that, you know, quite baffling to me, and I haven't seen all of the other ideas that you really have. So, you know, and it's not a criticism per se, but what would you do? And so what we're seeing, I think, is a coronation without policy. Well, then on what basis are you coronating someone if there is no policy? That's the confusing part for me.
I think it's the true definition of hypocrisy, is what you are trying to say, John, and two-faced. But hey, you know what? Let's let bygones be bygones and switch gears here onto the Canadian startup
People
side,
can make
where we have
mistakes. Yeah.
people make mistakes, John. Talking about someone who didn't make a mistake is the founders of Stackadapp. Stackadapp was recently in the news, a company that's had pretty low profile in Canada, receiving a
Yep.
$235 million
Yep.
US investment from Ontario teachers, as well as the new fund, Mark Machen's fund from CPP and Intrepid Growth Partners, making its first ever investment, along with 4 undisclosed investors. There's a secondary deal, but the company's financials are really what's
Yep.
taken people by surprise. You and I have both obviously followed this story. A lot of people in the industry know it, but Stackadapp, for
Long
people
time. Yeah.
that don't know what it is a leading demand-side advertising platform, DSP. And they came to kind of be with very little primary funding investments. Plaza Ventures and Mars IAF were the original early investors alongside some angels. And the company had raised, I think, only $5 million or so. But the revenue and the profitability of this business is exploded. Company is expected to exceed 500 million in revenue and 125 million in operating earnings. Those earnings make it some of the largest and most profitable private tech companies in the country, and have higher earnings than some top line $100 million revenue businesses in startup land. So this company is poised for an IPO. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, pretty incredible returns for early investors like Plaza and Mars IAF, over 100x on is what they've said, has already been taken out of the business while still holding on to a majority of their positions.
Yeah, no, it's a tremendous, company. A few years ago, when I, spent some time understanding the business, and great folks managing the business. What startled me was the profitability of this business. The DSP business has had its ups and downs big time, right? With Google and Facebook controlling
Trade
the
Desk.
algorithms, it's been very, very difficult. Yeah, for other folks to kind of come in, because the stroke of the pen risk of changes in algorithms sidelined many businesses, but these folks have gotten through onto the other side. So, good for them. I mean, there is, this is going back to Sean Silcoff's story about there's a number of Canadian companies that, we've been shitting all over ourselves over the last few years and saying, oh, tech is dead, etc. There are a lot of very good companies here. And this is just another example of another one. And, the unusual part of the story here is most people outside of the tech sector never heard of it before.
No, absolutely not. The last thing I want to talk about, John, is the massive capex boom we're seeing here in big tech and AI land, especially after the DeepSeek news came out, which obviously had a lot of, hairiness on it in terms of the actual dollars spent to train the newest R1 model. But in terms of capex that is coming out of some of these big tech companies like Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, and Alphabet, it is coming out at unprecedented amounts into their AI infrastructure, and it's also outpacing the largest capex surge of the oil and gas industry from the mid 2010s, is an article that the information had put together. So these four companies spent an average of 17.2% of their revenues on capex. Just to give you a sense, Meta plans to spend 60 to 65 billion in just 2025 alone, nearly 32% of its projected revenue. Microsoft is laying out 80 billion, which is almost 30% of its projected revenue in 25. Alphabet is spending 51 billion in capex, 15% of its revenue, and Alphabet anticipates spending 75 billion plus in 24, representing 12% of its projected revenue, with an expected increase over 25 as well. The peak of what Exxon and Chevron and BP and Shell spent in 2012 to 2016 investment boom in the oil industry was 10.2% of revenue on capex. Different business models completely. One has a consumption aspect to it, obviously, that maybe you can amortize over a long period of time, but this AI one seems to have a lot more upfront cost to it that they hope will pay off in many, many cycles.
The numbers, I mean, everybody's seeing the numbers are astronomical. The numbers of investments in AI focused data centers from an infrastructure perspective are going to be astronomical. Perhaps spending on energy. The the part that I would say is a counter to that, though, is, and we talked about the impact of DeepSeek, and to me, it wasn't so much the approach that they took on getting the training data on there, and the real number that they spend and the real technology that they're using. I mean, who the hell knows? But it was actually on the inference side. And again, there's better experts than I to speak to it. But if their inference costs are truly 5% or so of the other competitors, it raises the question then in my mind is, has there been an overspend in some of these businesses? And that to me was the big implication. And, when you're getting monstrous amount of dollars thrown at you, are you really being strategic with those resources? So the question that I really do have uh, is this going to end up being an effective spend or a way grossly overspend? And again, you know what I'm thinking about? Same thing happened for us old guys in about 96, 97. And it was the build out of telecom networks and lighting up fiber everywhere. And it started to happen at about 1999, 2000. And if everybody remembers, this is the peak of Lucent, Nortel, and all these sort of plays. And the billions that were being spent were astronomical. And then they realized, oh my God, did we ever overbuild? And I guess, I'm not saying it's the same thing here, but it's feeling kind of similar on here. And is it the right build versus throwing a whole bunch of capital at something? And we're not going to really know until with the benefit of hindsight.
No, I mean, the two things I think about is what choice do they have? It's kill or be killed in terms of somebody's going to do it and take the lead and own the market. You don't have a risk of cannibalizing your business that way.
Right.
But then you have the other player who's not mentioned at all here is Apple. And they're not spending, it feels like, a dime on this and letting everybody else fight it out. And they're going to be the operating
Nothing.
system that just leverages off the cost. It's
That's
unbelievable
exactly.
to see them. Now, their cash has dropped a lot since it's the lowest it's been in a decade or so. But I do believe it's quite unique to see someone of that size keeping their cards close to their chest on the spend side while all these other guys fight it out. So we'll have to wait and see. But I do agree, it does feel reminiscent of those Lucent days, John. Well, until next time, we'll jump in the tank. Thanks so much for being here.
Great. Thanks, Matt.